let me know what's going on. So as I mentioned when I went live on air, I have on my NBA NYC shirt today, and I have to give kudos to the NBA because they have finally become the first team to restart their season or reopen their season as far as officially have documentation and wording that they will definitely return. And that is set to return on July 31st. But there is a lot to get to before we get into that information as well. And as always, each and every Monday, you know what it is, news updates before we get started. So there has been reported that there are racism allegations surviving Iowa football. Um, Sixers coach Ime Udoka emerges as the front runner for the Bulls' vacancy at head coach. Uh, Amanda Nunes makes history and retains her UFC title. She is the first UFC fighter to hold two titles and successfully defend both of those titles. So shout outs to her. In everything that we are going on and everything that we are dealing with in this time right now, the Denver Broncos had a march in protest of racial inequality. Former NFL receiver, wide receiver Rashay Caldwell dies in a shooting in Florida. Conor McGregor announces his retirement. Michael Jordan will donate $100 million over 10 years to causes that ensure racial equality, social justice, and greater access to education. Adrian Peterson says he plans to kneel this season during the national anthem. And Des Bryant calls out the front office of the Cowboys and Jason Witten. So there you have it. That is your news, your updates, and everything for today. So, like I mentioned, we have some NBA, have some basketball coming back to us. The plan is for the season to take place in Disney World, and there's the way it's broken down. It's kind of funny. It's kind of strange how they did it. So I am going to attempt to break this down for you the best I can as I went through it and try and get you some good information, some pertinent information on what happens and when it happens. So there are 22 teams that have been invited to the there's 22 teams that have been invited to play and take on the remainder of the season. And those teams are, and I'm going to give you them in a list, and they're in alphabetical order by their cities, but I'm just going to read the list off to you real quick. You've got the Celtics, the Nets, the Mavericks, the Nuggets, the Rockets, the Pacers, the Clippers, the Lakers, the Grizzlies, the Heat, the Bucks, the Pelicans, the Thunder, the Magic, the Sixers, the Suns, Blazers, Kings, Spurs, Raptors, Jazz, and finally the Washington Wizards are the 22 teams that were invited. The 8 teams that were not invited were pretty much those 8 teams that were not in playoff contention. And those teams are the Knicks, the Warriors, the Kings, the Bulls, the Cavs, the Pistons, the Hawks, and the Timberwolves. So getting into this, before we get into it rather, it's going to seem really strange to not have the Warriors in the playoffs this year. It's going to seem really, really strange for that. And I don't understand how we're going to get through it, because, you know, in basketball, the last few years, you've actually gotten used to seeing the Warriors in the playoffs, going deep into the playoffs. And that's not going to happen this year. They're not even going to be in the playoffs. And if, as you see, when I read the list off, they haven't even been invited to Orlando to continue the season. And some people will probably ask, well, why weren't all the teams invited? Well, like I just mentioned, and I'm going to get to it, there is a small number, and there's a crunch time because they want to get into the playoffs and they want to start the playoffs and have a champion. So they had to condense it and bring in some other teams. And with that being said, they brought in the teams that were definitely going to make the playoffs, and then they brought in a couple teams that were close. And I will definitely explain to you how they're going about doing that. So you ask, why is there only 22 teams? And if not, you are also tuned into the Sports Rap podcast, and we are right now breaking down the NBA's return to play, which is slated to start on July 31st. And I have some other important dates that I will also blend in with as I cover this story. So again, like I said, the option was to bring 16 teams or even all 30, but the league owners approved the 22 team proposal. And like you said, those are the teams that were definitely in the playoffs and those that were close or had a fighting chance to get into the playoffs. So folks, they're going to have the teams that were invited, the 22 teams, that were invited, are going to have an 8 game remainder to the regular season before the playoffs begin. Home court advantage is going to be like almost non-existent because they're playing all at neutral sites. So we'll definitely see how that plays out. And a lot of people have been talking the timeline for that. So let me actually get to the timeline for the league and how it's going to play out. So, on June the 15th, they're allowing all the international players to return to their markets. On June 21st, all players will report. The day after that, they will begin coronavirus testing. Okay, on June 30th, that begins the start of a training camp, which I think is needed, and I think this is also part of the reason why there were only 22 teams invited. July 31st will begin the restarted season. So that's when these teams will begin playing their 8 remaining games. And what they said is basically, or it looks like the way they figured things out, after these 8 games, seeds 1 through 7 in each conference will be pretty much locked in place. So that leaves that 1 spot, the 8th spot for each conference. And I'll go into that in a little bit on how they plan on doing that. On August the 25th, they will have the draft lottery. On October the 12th, we're expecting that to be if necessary, the game 7, the final game of the season of the finals. On October 15th, they will have an NBA draft. On October 18th, free agency will start. On November 10th, training camps will start for the 2021 season, and on December 1st will be opening night, which is actually moved up quite a bit because they have initially projected the next season would start around Christmas. So folks, again, I am live, Sports Rap Radio. The show is the group page, and you can also, if you have a minute, you can call in and talk to me. Number to call in is 215-221-9435. That's how you can get a hold of me. You can get in and you can let me know what you're thinking and how you're thinking on this topic. So the 8-game closing of the schedule, I think that's needed because we were already in a pandemic, so a lot of these facilities and a lot of places that people or these players would actually go and work out were closed for an extended periods of time. And I'm sure that a lot of these guys have private places where they could have continued their workouts or done workouts on their own, which is great. And I think that most of them probably thought the same way and did that because they're honing their craft. This is what they do as a professional athlete. And now that things are starting to gradually open, I think with the small training camp, yes, but I think these 8 games will help these teams get back into a rhythm. We already know going in, and this is one of the things that they had pegged as a possible issue, and that was injuries and sloppy play. So I think this starting of a training camp and then having them play 8 games will kind of alleviate some of that. The training camp, you'll get to see where your players are and how much you have to work, how hard you have to work to get back in shape or get your players into shape. And then you can get a read on, moving forward, things that you want to get squared away for the playoffs, depending where you seed at the end of this 8-game conclusion to the season. So the NBA is the first major sport in the United States that looks like will be beginning play. And like I said, they have confirmation that they will resume. Like I said, I'm going through the logistics, some of the logistics with you right now. So we definitely have some confirmation on that. Other leagues are still somewhat up in the air. Hockey has decided to go into the playoffs, and they're reseeding those playoffs as well. And as I get more information on that down the line, I will definitely bring that to you. So initially, in the plans for the NBA returning, there was talk of a 16-team tournament, no conference affiliation, just 16 teams to make a playoffs run and crown a championship or crown a champion. That has since, again, as we know, that has since been changed, and they have the 22 invited teams. They're going to do an 8-game conclusion to a regular season, and then they will have the playoffs. And the playoffs will be as they were the normal format. There will be 8 teams that will play from each conference, and then we'll go Eastern versus West for the finals. One thing that is going to change for this abridged season is they're going to have a play-in tournament. So what that means is, and here's one of the things that I just mentioned to you a little earlier, is the fact that once each team has played its remaining 8-game schedule, the numbers 1 through 7 seeds in each conference at least will pretty much be locked in. At that point, and here's where it gets a little tricky, if the number 9 seed is within 4 games of the number 8 seed, there will be a play-in series for that final spot in each conference. So they're going to go with the top 18 teams. Okay, like we said, we know once the season is over, these 8 games, 1 through 7 should pretty much be a lock. So you got teams that will get in to make that 8th seed, and like they said, if that team number 9 is close enough, where they say within 4 games to that number 8 seed, they will have a play-in tournament, a play-in series for that number 8 seed in both conferences. Then, the draft order will be set the same way. The teams that did not make the playoffs will enter the draft lottery, and the lottery will be based on the records of the teams as of the standings on March the 11th, when the season was suspended. So these 8 games, as far as for the draft lottery, will have pretty little or no bearing on what's going on with the draft and how they select the draft lottery. So one of the other things it came up are some issues that they knew they would have, and they discussed these issues and how they figured they may attempt attacking these issues or handling these issues. Of course, first and foremost, they are positive tests for coronavirus. They're saying that if someone in the bubble tests positive, whether it's a player, coach, executive, or anyone, it will be a major concern. If that does happen, the league is not expected to stop play. Instead, the person who has tested positive will be quarantined. Will be quarantined while everyone who came into contact with that person will continue to be monitored. An outbreak within a single team, if several players or staff members end up testing positive, could obviously force a reevaluation of the plan in place. The NBA will have daily coronavirus testing for everyone within the bubble, per ESPN's Winona Show. So, one of the things that I like about this is the fact that they are allegedly prepared for this. They have a contingency plan for this. And it's the basic contingency plan that we all have had with the coronavirus. If someone tests positive, they get quarantined. Anyone that came in contact with them will be monitored, as we have been doing all along. One of the things that I mentioned, the injuries and the sloppy play. Of course, these guys haven't played in months. And any professional athlete, or any athlete for that matter, knows that long of a layoff, there's going to be some rust, there's going to be some kinks in the armor that you need to bang out. Hence, they will have a full training camp, or what they consider to be a full training camp, and then play these 8 games and then go into the playoffs. I think the training camp is going to help, but I also think that just because of the layoff, a couple of these first 8 games are going to have some sloppy play. It's just a natural thing that's going to happen, and the people that understand basketball, that have played basketball, like I said, the layoff is the biggest part. And I'm not even mentioning or concerned too much about the players being out of shape, because like I said, I know that they have been working on their stuff on their own. So the sloppy play will come. We'll just have to bear through it and then get into the playoffs. Teams invited to Orlando cannot fall below the 8 teams who are staying home in terms of lottery odds. So, but they can maneuver among the 6 teams playing in Orlando who ultimately won't make the playoffs. If the Wizards end up, for example, in a play-in series for the final spot in the East, will they really be trying to win that and compromise a potential top 10 pick just for the right to make the first round and get bounced by the Bucks? So there's a thought, and we know what we know about the tanking issues. So that is a valid point. Will a team that gets into that position of the play-in game for the 8 seed, knowing that if they make the playoffs, it's going to do some jostling to their position as far as in the lottery? Will they go wholeheartedly and risk, like they said, giving up a top 10 pick or not? It will be yet to be seen when the season starts. Like I mentioned in my intro, no home court advantage, which I think is a great thing for right now. I think that will make these 4 games of the remaining 8 somewhat competitive moving into the playoffs. I also think that the home court advantage not being in play will also make for some exciting basketball in the playoffs, because you don't have that advantage. I think it would be a little bit more even keel. That's all depending on how the referees call the games, and we know how that can go. We had a show on that. We talked about that before, but we know how that can go. Hopefully, it won't mess up what's going on right now, and won't hinder the play. But no home court advantage, I think, is great, and I think it makes the playing field a little bit more even, a little bit more level for all of the teams who could possibly have had an advantage. Now, they say no home court advantage, but Orlando was in it, was invited, so there's a small home court advantage for Orlando. It's just not their original home court. They have been moved to the Disney complex. So for one team, there might be some semblance of, or some resemblance of, a home court advantage, but not too much. I don't think it will make a difference at all. And then, like I mentioned, the start of the 2021 season, which those dates I gave you earlier, key dates to remember, and all of that. So I think the NBA has a good plan. Like I said, it looks like they attempted to cover everything. as far as getting the season to a playoff, a regular season, and some training camp, and I did that backwards. But they're going to make it feel like for the players, bring them in as slowly as they can and make them comfortable as they can. Also, their contingency plans as far as what could be expected, like the things that I just went through, the sloppy play, the corona testing, things of that nature. I think they have a plan for that. Now, what's going to happen is we'll have to wait and see when all of these things get up and running. We will have to see how the testing plays out and see what happens with the testing if anyone does pop up positive or anything like that. We'll see how it gets handled. But I think the NBA deserves some credit right now. There was some talk in the last few weeks before they finalized this decision that they may have dropped the ball in handling this. I think the only sport that I really feel has dropped the ball is Major League Baseball, because their plan is like all over the place, crazy, wild. I don't think it's going to get done. I don't know how they're going to get their season started. But like I said, hockey has instituted to return, and they're going to have a playoff. They had an initial playoff bracket. I think they're going to adjust that once more before they actually finally play. So that's a good note. But again, kudos to the NBA, because it appears that they have covered, on paper and for all intent purposes, all of their bases. They dotted most of their I's and crossed most of their T's. And I say most because we don't know how it's going to play out until it actually happens. But the plan in play, the plan to return to play, I think is a good one. I think it's good for the nation. I think it's good for society, because we will have some live sports, something else for us to focus our attention on. Not that what is going on right now currently in the nation is not a focus, but outside of that, we will have some sports returning. It's your boy D. It is 11:36, 36 minutes past the 11 a.m. hour. I'm going to take a break. When I return, I will get into racism in sports, and that's something heavy that's been going on. I will discuss the Jake Fromm, Drew Brees topics. I will also give you some stuff from Martellus Bennett and some other issues that I have where people are still confused about one Colin Kaepernick and what his fight, his protest was all about. We'll definitely get into that as well. You are tuned in to SportsRap, Heat 100 Radio. It's your boy D. I'll see you on the other side in just a few minutes.